Thanks for tuning in to the PLR podcast, where we seek to build a network of leftists in the state of Rhode Island so that someday we can win political power. As always, I'm Alex, joined here
by Evan
and Andy.
And thanks for listening, joining us. There's a lot of news to go through today.
Yeah, some stuff has happened.
Yeah.
And we wanted to make a point. There's some organizations in the state of Rhode Island that have recently come out with or endorsed a climate proposal. So we thought it would be a good episode to go over climate change in leftist politics. But first, there's some other local Rhode Island news that we figured we would hit.
So, I think everyone that's listening to this already knows what happened at the Capitol. And some of us might actually know people who had gone to the Capitol themselves.
Hope not.
Well, I know.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Well, no, at my work, there are people whose family member went to the Capitol.
Oh, shit.
And the day after, anyway, they were kind of like happy about it. And, they should have went further. And then I think as soon as the FBI started getting involved, they got a little more quiet about it. But yeah, so like, I'm just looking at a news article right now talking about a Fall River business owner who attended the Capitol riot as well. So these aren't like people that we don't know. These are people that, we might have met in passing. We might go to their businesses. We might see them in church. But what I'm going to talk about today is Representative Justin Price, because he's recently come up in the news because he's one of our state reps who went down there, and hilariously enough, he said that it was Black Lives Matter and Antifa who led the charge to the Capitol.
So he just bought that line, hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, it's
funny.
It's hilarious, really. Conspiracy theorists just grabbing onto whatever rope they can when they're drowning, and blaming Black Lives Matter and Antifa is like one of their towers.
I wonder if he ran unopposed in Rhode Island, because it just strikes me as weird.
No, actually, he didn't. I saw an article by Uprise RI. Shout out Uprise RI. Talking about how he only won by a couple votes. Megan Cotter came within a snowball's throw of taking Justin Price's House seat.
Do you know what district he represents?
Yeah, it's District 39, Richmond, Exeter, and Hopkinton.
It's kind of I mean, I'm just surprised that like is he like a QAnon person?
Well, yeah, we don't.
Like, how deep is he in this? That's what I want to know.
He must be. If he went here and he drank the Kool-Aid enough to go there and be a part of this, then I'm sure that he was some kind of QAnon psycho. I
don't know. Do you think that like everybody that was there are QAnon people? Because I get the sense that like white supremacists, like Ku Klux Klan, the real deal, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, are not necessarily QAnon people. And QAnon people, I mean, they are white supremacists, but they're like two different groups that are just umbrellaed under the right. That's my like understanding of it. So it could just be that like he's not QAnon, but he's like the weird pro-Trump conservative, I don't know. I have no idea.
Well, the thing is, there's plenty of Republicans that, don't believe that Donald Trump won the race. Yeah. I think the only people that believe that Donald Trump won the race are the people that subscribe to this kind of conspiracy theory by QAnon.
Yeah, you might be right. Yeah.
So I think that's a necessary element to being a Trump supporter right now, is to believe the conspiracy theory that he won.
To be like being susceptible to that whole QAnon thing.
Yeah. Now,
I think the QAnon thing, the like main thing about QAnon is Donald Trump is going to save us.
Yeah.
So you've sort of, maybe you don't necessarily have to be a QAnon person to be a Trump supporter, but if you're a QAnon person, you're probably like, it's like squares and rectangles,
If you're a Q person, then Donald Trump is your savior. I mean, the whole thing is that those people that went into the Capitol building thought that after they did it, he would come
Yeah.
out and proclaim, I don't know, a new Trump empire. I have no idea exactly, but that he would get rid of the election results, and that the scariest thing, what we were talking about last night, is that there were people that wanted to execute certain senators and House members.
We'll see how far up that goes. With which Congress people were involved.
Right, and I wanted to make that point earlier when you said, well, both of you have now said something that I want to say this in response to, which is that, the people who were there are the people in power, the people, and also the people next door. It is people we know that went, and they didn't go. I mean, they haven't gone anywhere. It's not like they're re-emerging, because they've always been here, and people who have been negatively impacted by these folks know that. They're like, yeah, duh. And being, like a hood-wearing KKK person you're not like top-tier Nazi, there are people that, we would call fascists that are suit-wearing folks in the Capitol. So we know that
Cruz.
now.
Yeah, fuck Ted Cruz too. But yeah, there are a good amount of our government, at least, is sympathetic, to a lot of the flags that are being carried into the Capitol on that day.
Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind is that the senators who came out in support of stopping the electoral college count, senators like Ted Cruz and stuff, are people who benefit immensely from the white supremacist kind of base of American politics. That they're the most at risk, especially when you look at voter count in Texas. Ted Cruz benefits from having white Texans on his side, and not to mention all the pseudo and explicit kind of white supremacist endorsements that he's had over the time. And he's just one example. He's a senator. There were plenty of House members too that were. I mean, I think that there's 2 House QAnon people. This is for nationally, and of course, when you look locally, I'm sure at certain states,
like Justin Price.
Like Justin Price, yeah. But I mean, that's in Rhode Island. I wonder what other states look like as well, which is scary. Which is why, part of the whole point of this podcast is to encourage people to run against idiots like that. Even if you don't think that you have a shot in hell, at least you get conspiracy theorists out of government, local government.
I mean, the thing about white supremacy is that all white people benefit from it.
Yeah.
So if you're a white person who would do a better job than Justin Price, maybe think about replacing him.
Yeah.
So we have some more on Justin Price. I don't think I've talked about Seth Magaziner yet.
Nope.
So Seth Magaziner is a treasurer for Rhode Island, and he's a Democrat, and his history is pretty respectable. He went to Brown. He's been leading a lot of different programs to help different groups in Rhode Island that are in need, and it includes the Rhode Island's ABLE program, which allows Rhode Islanders living with disabilities and their families to save for disability-related expenses without sacrificing their eligibility for federal disability assistance programs. He's also a part of... he launched Your Money, which is a new program to automatically reunite Rhode Islanders with unclaimed property, and 35,000 people have already benefited from that. He's also a treasurer for the Pro-Equality Group and Political Action Committee Fight Back RI. He's on the board of directors for Crossroads.
Damn, this guy's everywhere.
Yeah, he's got a very respectable history. So he came out And he made a few comments about price. The main one being, at a time when American democracy is under siege from conspiracy theorists and white supremacists determined to overturn the free and fair presidential election, Rep. Justin Price has abused his platform by amplifying false conspiracy theories surrounding the attack on the U.S. Capitol. His behavior risks inflaming an already charged situation by encouraging those seeking to overturn the election. That's a pretty fair statement, I would think. It met some resistance by other members in Rhode Island, other politicians in Rhode Island, saying that a politician is accountable for their actions and not just their words, which I think is kind of a cop-out. But in response to this statement, Price has made an ad hominem attack, not really on Magaziner's character, but on his father's, because his father apparently was on some of the Epstein flights, which is pretty fucking terrible. But that's, I think, a red herring argument here. It's something to take attention away from Price, and he's basically just taking Price is taking some of the shit that's on him and trying to throw it back at other people, which is pretty pointless and fucked up. But
it's a whataboutism.
Yeah,
we were talking about this the other day. I think it's used by a lot of people on the right, which is like when they are blamed for something and they don't have a way out. The best way out is to say, well, what about this that happened? Russia is probably, I mean, at least from what I know, Russia is the biggest example of this. So if you go to Russia and speak to somebody about, I don't know, the invasion of Crimea, they say, oh, what about Kosovo? What about what happened in the 90s? And what about NATO? You know what I mean? So, like, it's not addressing the point itself.
It's taking attention away and putting it on something else.
And it seems to be really popular on the right. I mean, Donald Trump himself does it, so.
I don't understand why that's so effective, because I'm not a parent, but I was a child once, and I had parents, and I have siblings. And every time I tried that same kind of argument, oh, no, my sister did this or my sister did that, we're not talking about your sisters. We're talking about you. You shouldn't have done that. And I don't know how that kind of, like we understand that now, where we're like, oh, yeah, that kind of whataboutism when you're a kid because you got caught stealing cookies, but someone else stole cookies out of the jar before,
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand why people don't understand it's not a fair attack or argument as an adult. It just exists as an adult, and we can understand why it's not even a legitimate point to make when you're a child.
Yeah.
There's just some kind of, maybe it's part of wanting to believe something or having a side before the conversation starts, so it doesn't matter what they say. So whataboutism is only just an additional support to your biases. But
I think when you're a kid, fairness means everybody gets what they want. And not everybody gets treated the same way. So.
I also think that people who use whatabouts know that it's not a valid argument. It's just that they are in such a predicament, such a corner, that the only way to get out and to hold on to some sort of like shred of righteousness is to say, well, what about you did this? Or what about they did this? Or whatever. And so I think that is part of it. I mean, I don't think anybody sees that as like a wash your hand kind of moments of this whole thing. It's more of just trying to evenly distribute guilt or blame or whatever.
But legally speaking, there are precedents that, like, it's like we look to things that have happened in the past to try and figure out how to do things going forward. So I think like throwing somebody else under the bus is usually just trying to be like, well, hold up, how come they got away with it but I'm not? But I mean, we'll talk more about inequity in the legal system later, but
yeah, I mean, it's a huge part of the climate change debate too, is culpability for the amount of greenhouse gas emissions and parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. But like in certain circumstances, saying like, oh, what about so and so? It can help someone to see that, okay, blame is, maybe I am to blame a little bit, but it doesn't detract from the point that, like, we are not talking about that right now. We're talking about this, and after we talk about this, then we can move on to that. We can talk about that in some other way. So I'm sorry to use these abstracts, but it's, like, the easiest way that I think I can
No, you're right. It's
it.
the same as All Lives Matter. It's like, yeah, no doy, but we're talking about Black lives right now.
Right, yeah.
And they weren't saying that before Black Lives Matter came out. So
no, they sure weren't.
Just to close in this Justin Price situation, Uprise RI, again, talking about you dudes and gals and people, came out with a article with a list of people that are calling for Justin Price to step down. It's a substantial list. It's got a lot of politicians. It's got a lot of groups. It's got the DSA on there. It's got Sunrise RI. It's got the Young Democrats of Rhode Island, and a lot of councilors, a lot of senators, a lot of representatives. And I'm sure that list is going to grow.
Here's my thing with that. We kind of talked about this in the chat, and as a leftist, I agree with, like, calling out Price and asking him to step down. But I feel like if we want to avoid further crackdowns on demonstrations and direct action, then we have to be willing to hold an olive branch out to whatever side of the political spectrum disagrees with us, right? So, like, in my ideal 20 years, Democrats become the new right and leftism becomes the new Democrats, right? That won't happen, but let's just say it does. Or we can just use today as an example. It doesn't matter. But, like, what I'm saying is you have to give them an olive branch and allow them to demonstrate, even if you fundamentally disagree with them. So, like, my thing is that the storming of the Capitol building is wrong on every level, and all those people involved in it should be persecuted. But I think the people who were protesting themselves, like just the people who were on the lawn, like I don't think that they should get the same kind of
there's a
punishment
question there. There's a question. It's if they never stormed the Capitol, would we be having this conversation about Price, or would this not be a non-issue? Because is this only an issue because of what happened at the Capitol, or is this an issue because of his beliefs that Donald Trump won the election? I think first and foremost that if you're a politician and you work in the system, you should have faith in the system. Anything else is just a complete lie to yourself and your voter base.
That's true. Yeah.
So by going up there and saying that the elections in America aren't fair, and yet profiting by the elections that got you the place to where you sit, I think that there's a contradiction there. And on top of that, I think that a politician should represent the words of the people and not themselves. Mm-hmm. And you have to understand that whether you're in your suit to go to the courthouse or the Capitol, or if you're like hanging out at the beach, you still hold that title and who you represent. So every action you do does reflect on the people. So in a way, this could also absolve Ted Cruz from my hatred, because Ted Cruz, his supporters honestly believe all the bullshit that Ted Cruz is saying. So in a way, he is representing his people. But I don't think that the people of Rhode Island were represented appropriately by Justin Price. And I think that if the people in Rhode Island are angry enough to ask him to resign, they're more than welcome to do so.
The thing with Ted Cruz is different, though, because yes, he has been elected like consecutively for I don't know how long. He's been a senator forever. But the thing that is different, in my opinion, is that Ted Cruz is a federal senator. Was in the Capitol building literally when it happened, ostensibly. I don't know if he actually was, because a lot of these senators don't even show up.
No, he was. I believe I saw him speak before that happened.
And he was like part of the whole federal process of denying the election. Whereas like this Price dude is a House member of Rhode Island, which like you're absolutely right. He represents those people, and if those people voted him in, they voted him in for a reason. They believe what he says or whatever like that. But Ted Cruz seems more. If we're talking about like people with their deep hand inside this whole thing, Ted Cruz's hand is definitely more involved in it. And so like if Price is to resign, then why shouldn't Ted Cruz, who like I think unarguably is more involved in the whole.
Well, Ted Cruz was paid to be there. Justin Price was not.
That's true too. Yeah. I guess money talks.
Also, Ted Cruz is a snake. He went up there his entire speech about making a council to look at if there was any kind of funny business going on with the election was based on an argument of statistics. And given through like the 2 or 3 minute speech that he had, he took a 33%, and he just kept increasing that to half to 2/3. You know what I mean? He kept expanding that amount to make his argument more persuasive. And he's a total fucking snake. There's not a.
He's the Zodiac killer.
I was gonna say that.
You stole that from him.
He's the Zodiac killer.
Anyway, I think we've squeezed all the juice out of this story. What do you peeps got?
As far as like stories not related to climate change, did you guys read about the doctor who deliberately exposed his patients to COVID?
No.
Supposedly, I mean he denies it, but supposedly he deliberately exposed his patients to COVID because he came into work with like fever and stuffy nose and shit like that. But he told his secretaries and his patients that he was fine and he was wearing a mask and everything is cool. And I was reading through this article and I was like, oh man, what a doofus. Why would he do that? He's a doctor. And he's saying like, as a doctor, I know what I can do and what I can't do. But it's like, unarguably, man, like your secretary's got COVID because of you. So you can't really argue your way out of that. But what was kind of scarier in this whole article is it says, in addition, patients and staff complained that he, the doctor, yelled, threw things, and employed intimidation, creating a hostile environment.
Wow.
And so what I was thinking when I was reading this is like, you know, we've all heard that, we've all heard people talk about how medicine is a business, right? Doctors are businesses. And this guy, he owns a lot, or I don't know if he owns a lot of private practice locations throughout the state of Rhode Island. And I just thought that when we think of like small business tyrants, bad managers and bad bosses, we don't typically think of doctors, but hearing about this guy was a reminder that, you know, that's why he came in and exposed all these people to COVID, right? Because he needed money. He wanted to make money. So I thought it was a kind of interesting.
Was that his defense to this? Is that they just wanted to make money or keep money coming in?
According to the article that I read, he like had no defense. He just said, I know what I was doing. I wasn't exposing anybody to COVID, and that's not true. But then his secretaries and his patients like came out and said, no, we all have COVID, so I think that you did it. And his secretaries confirmed that he had a fever, he had the sniffles, he was just generally sick. But you know, this dummy just exposed everyone.
Sounds like time for a lawsuit, probably.
Yeah, the Rhode Island, let's see, it's actually the state of Rhode Island has actually revoked his license. So he said he's going to appeal it because he thinks he did everything right. But I mean, if you got like your secretaries and your patients telling you that you didn't do anything right, then that the favor is heavily against him.
If you go to the doctor's office and you come back sicker than you were when you went there, I'd say your doctor's not doing his job.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I mean, they tell 5-year-olds that if you have the sniffles, stay home. Don't come in. You know, like, doesn't matter if it's COVID or not. Like, as soon as you get a stuffy nose, just don't do anything. They tell us that. You know, I went to the DMV the other day, and I had to talk to a person at the door and tell them that I wasn't sick. Or I went to the dentist the other day and they had to take my temperature as I walked in the door. So it's like, how the hell does a doctor get away with this shit, you know?
I saw the most dystopian video on Instagram. It was like this little girl, had to be like 3 years old. Their entire life right now, or at least like conscious life, has been built around COVID and precautionary measures. And she was walking up to every square object that she saw and putting her hand underneath it, thinking it would dispense like hand sanitizer.
That's sad.
Like, so that's like, they don't know any different.
Yeah.
You know, that's just wild. Like, I mean, it was kind of cute. She was walking up to like electrical boxes and like trying to get, and then like thinking that she got it on her hands and that kind of thing. But I mean, it's also really fucking sad.
It's not. Yeah, it's nothing that I would have done as a 5-year-old. You know what I mean? Like, this is a new reality for
fucking
kids
is.
that old.
So I mean, speaking of, I'm trying to think of a good segue here. Speaking of negligence and using your profession to put other people in danger, I'm gonna bring up the update about the situation with Jhamal Gonsalves, which we've talked about on the podcast before. After months of investigations, probably like three plus months of investigations and protests, the Attorney General, Peter Nerona, decided not to charge the little jerk responsible for hitting Jhamal Gonsalves in the head so hard that it caused brain damage. The statement in the report says Jhamal sustained injuries as the result of being struck in the head by a stop sign, which had been struck by the officer in his cruiser as he attempted to follow Gonsalves into a turn off of Elmwood. So the cop hit the stop sign hit Jhamal. Jhamal goes to the hospital, and yet the cop is, nothing's gonna happen. I think he had like 2 days off or something, and like had to be retrained, which, like, I mean, retraining is something in that, I mean, depending on the training, I guess it could be closing the gap, but it's not that restorative. I have no faith in the brotherhood of police that they would actually do anything restorative to one of their own. Anyway, the AG said the actions of the police officer leading up to the incident did not meet the standard of criminal recklessness, but he left open the possibility that the police behaved in ways that were civilly negligent. So basically there are all these like weensy details creating a loophole that for some reason protects the cop instead of a civilian. Cops, you know, can't be held responsible for their slow reaction time and things that confuse them enough to hit a stop sign that's on a metal pole that's bolted into the ground.
Yeah, we should just get rid of them stop signs.
Holy shit, this is like terrible.
But regular folk don't have the same luxury, right, of like making errors or getting scared or confused. Cops can unload bullets into an unarmed woman sleeping in her own bed and say they feared for their lives.
Oh, that was civil negligence, okay?
But a community member can't ride a moped without being nearly run over and sent to the hospital.
It's those damn stop signs.
I know.
This reminds me of a quote from this movie Collateral, where Tom Cruise shoots somebody and they fall out of a window and they hit the ground and they die. And the guy's like, "Oh, you fucking killed him." And he's like, "I didn't kill him. The bullets in the fall killed him." I mean, it's the same kind of bullshit as that, sure. You know? Oh, the cop didn't kill him.
Don't hate the player. Hate the game.
I guess so. I guess that's the thing.
Now, I believe in abolition of police and prison, so I'm not necessarily advocating for the arrest of the cop. But dude needs to answer for what he did, at the very least financially. I won't do it. I won't get really into it, but I can just say that I have a personal experience with the same type of brain injury, and it's really hard to come back from that, and it's also hard for the family and the friends. It's hard to care for somebody going through that. It's emotionally draining, it's physically draining, and Lord knows it's financially draining. But if we look to Mark Gonsalves, the father, and say, Mr. Gonsalves, what do you need? He's mostly asking for people to just stay on it, don't give up. Let's stand together in unity or whatever. Unity is a big word we've been hearing a lot lately. And I don't know, unity's cool, but money's cooler. So there have been some organized rallies, including one a couple of days ago with Provex, who we're going to have on in a number of weeks. And there is a GoFundMe. So, you can send your financial love and your verbal love, not to just Jhamal, but to the whole family. And check out our Instagram to get the link to the GoFundMe, as well as find out about events and actions and resources and opportunities. It's at PLR Pod on Instagram. And if I say so myself, we're worth the follow.
Agreed.
Well, we're perfectly at a half hour, so I think that is a good... I do have another Dave Says, but we could do it at the end. If we get there. But I wanted to devote a lot of time to climate change. Because in my personal opinion, climate change and leftist politics are like peanut butter and jelly, right? It makes so much sense, because part of the reason is because when we look at climate change, the causes for it, greenhouse gas emissions, industrialization, it all stems from the way that our economic base is structured. And contrary to what a lot of people might think, Soviet-style state socialism is the same thing. What we're looking at is an obsession with growth, an obsession with industrialization, with production, that has led since the Industrial Revolution, probably, which is when a lot of scientists date the beginning of the Anthropocene to today. We have changed forms of energy, but that doesn't mean that we've lessened the use of that energy. So coal is a good example. Used to be that when the Industrial Revolution kicked off, it was coal, and coal is viewed as the first major fossil fuel. And then we transitioned to oil and natural gas. But that doesn't mean that we stopped using coal, right? Remember Trump's whole thing about bringing coal back and the coal miners?
But clean coal, though.
Clean, quote unquote.
Whatever
clean
that
coal.
is.
So we have had these historic energy transitions in the system that we live in, but that doesn't mean that we've used any less. And in the 1980s, scientists were starting to warn officials about the greenhouse gas emissions and the parts per million in the atmosphere, and where the sort of cap is for this stuff. The average in the Holocene, which is the epoch in which humans have existed on Earth, is 250 to 200 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. Scientists say once you get to 300, you get incremental increases in global temperature across the board. But it's like a half degree, so barely noticeable, but still there. I think we've now surpassed 500 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, and there's no going back from that. So a lot of misgivings that people have is that, technology will figure out a way to sequester the carbon and blast it off into space or something. We can liquefy it and then blast it off into space, or we can harden it and blast it off into space. It always involves blasting it off into space. But basically, there's this hope that even leftists have that technology will get us out of this mess. But technology is what got us in this mess. And so I'm not here advocating that we have to go back to prehistoric times, but I do suggest that maybe we should start thinking differently about technology and its place in our life. Anyway, that's my spiel about climate change, why I think it's the most important thing. I will also add, for people who are into philosophy and leftist politics, that I teach environmental history. And one of the things that we teach as a broader class theme is that if you take a European history course or something like that, or Western Civ or whatever it is, we usually look at the Enlightenment as the moment in which humans kind of broke out of their shell. The scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, as the moment of discovery, realization that humans are sort of capable of anything. Our potential of knowledge is endless. And therefore, all we can see is this sort of trajectory of progress leading to some ideal world. And this is where you get Hegel. This is where Marx is starting to think in the 19th century about these progressive sort of progresses towards utopia, towards understanding the world completely. But one thing that we do emphasize when we teach environmental history is that actually, if you think of it from an environmental perspective, it's been flipped. So it was the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, who actually started us on the trajectory of climate change, what's going on. So we're actually moving backwards in progress rather than the upwards progress trajectory.
Fuck, Kaczynski was right.
Ted Kaczynski? Oh,
Yeah.
man. Yeah, I mean, maybe in that way, maybe not. I mean, did Ted Kaczynski say anything about climate?
Well, he said industrialization is like one of the worst things to happen to the human race.
I think that, I mean, I think that, like, iPhones are great, right? And I remember, like, I didn't have the first few generations of iPhone because I didn't have the money, but I think the first one I got was like iPhone 3 or something like that. And I was like, this is an amazing piece of technology. You remember it had like the silver edges and shit like that? It was more boxy. Yeah. Now, I would have kept it forever. But the problem is, as everyone knows, Apple comes out with these software updates that make that piece of technology obsolete. And so my idea with a lot of this stuff is, like, let's not go backwards per se, but what's wrong with some of the things that we have? Why do we have to keep iPhone X and iPhone X5 and iPhone, I don't know, what's next?
To drive profit.
Yeah, I mean, that is basically what it comes down to, and that's why capitalism right now is the most dangerous thing for the climate. But I'm also invested in thinking of ways of other social and economic forms of organization that are better for the climate. In the Soviet Union, state socialism wasn't the answer because they were also just as obsessed with industrialization and progress. So it's got to be something else. But all this is by way of saying that Rhode Island organizations have recently come out with platforms for the Rhode Island Green New Deal. The one that I read was put out by Sunrise RI, who we are trying to get to come on the show. I think they will be on this year at some point, so listen to that. And this is kind of adapting the larger federal Green New Deal idea to the state of Rhode Island. And what is on the platform, just to go through it quickly, is trying to get green candidates to win legislative majority in not just Rhode Island, but in New England, because the way that they're framing this is that it's a New England effort, not just Rhode Island. Universal employment, which they're saying would be based on green technologies and green energy, green food production, healthcare, housing, affordable housing with efficient energy. They're looking at energy caps or energy consumption caps for these affordable houses and renovating old houses rather than wasting the materials on new houses. They do point out that 46,000 people in Rhode Island are without health care, and so that's another major push for this Green New Deal policy. I think that Evan might talk a little bit about how healthcare is related to climate justice and race. Rebuilding the energy structure in the state itself so that we can put a cap on utility bills, for example, so that we're not wasting so much gas, or I think so that we can transition away from gas and fossil fuels, and changing Rhode Island's transportation, which, according to this statistic, 36% of Rhode Island's emissions come from state transportation. So if you want to read that the Sunrise thing, you can find it on their website. You can find them on Instagram. I think it's just at sunrise_RI or something like that. Or you can go to their website. They have a website. It's a whole lot of letters, so I'm not going to read it here because you probably won't understand me. But we could put it at the bottom of the episode. But there's a lot more involved in climate change than just the warming of the temperature or which country is more responsible for greenhouse gas emissions, and much more than just saying capitalism is the fault or at blame, or socialism is the better alternative. There's a lot more going on here, and I've heard it joked about a few times that environmentalism is the protest of white cis males, because that's the only because one, they feel most guilty for it, and two, they don't feel the pressures of being not white cis male, and sure there's some truth to that too, but I don't want anyone to assume that means that people of color aren't affected by climate change, or that it doesn't matter to a part of the population, where I think it matters to everybody, but in different degrees of extremity. So.
Yeah, there's a lot of environmental factors that'll definitely affect families that are below the poverty line, like putting low-income housing near airports or near power stations and that kind of thing. And it's all strategic. It's not by accident, and it's fucked, basically. But
there's a great book by Donetta Taylor called Toxic Communities, and she goes over some different cities in the United States. I think the most relevant for me is Chicago, because I lived in Southside Chicago, where if you look geographically at the city of Chicago, it is heavily segregated. First of all, the city is Southside Chicago is known as the black and brown neighborhood, whereas the north is white and more affluent, and it gets more investment from the city. But part of the argument is that South Chicago is where it is and developed the way that it did because of its proximity to Gary, Indiana, which used to be the major steel production area of the United States. So all of those gross emissions coming out of steel production were going to Southside Chicago and dropping into the ground, into the water, literally polluting everything that these people ate and drank. So again, racial issues and climate change are a major component of environmentalism itself.
Yeah, like Flint, Michigan, right? That's a good example as well. But anyway, I'm
sorry. I have a lot to say. Excuse me for coughing so much. I have a lot to say about this, and I'm gonna overlap with stuff that both of you just said because I wrote this down earlier. In fact, I was doing so much research and writing so much, Alex made fun of me. But
I just said it looked like you were writing a paper. That's all.
Well, I was. And if I don't get an A on it, I'm going to be very upset. I'm going to storm your office. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this situation here. The headline of this Uprise RI article. Another shout out to Uprise. I'm looking for a job if you need somebody. The article is called Providence Announces New Policies on Climate Justice. Ooh, climate justice. Now, what are we talking about when we say climate justice? Alex just brought some of it up. But like thinking about the leftist approach to this business of saving the Earth. I like to say Earth like Will Smith in Independence Day, which like.
Welcome to Earth.
Yeah, he says Will, just like that. Will, is that you? Yeah. Which like you want to talk about saving the world. Let's get into this cinematic masterpiece. No, really, it's a film about more or less an outside threat, whereas our current real life situation is the threat of the people, the inhabitants of this planet. But I'm not talking about like Jim Everyman putting his Miller can in the trash instead of the recycling. Although Jim really should recycle, but there are so many people in positions of power, you know, like lawmakers, business owners, landowners, RuPaul, Elon Musk, etc., who are developing and maintaining these systems that are like literally destroying the physical planet, you know, with the ice caps and the air pollution and extreme weather, etc., but also by disproportionately heaping this shit on populations that are already being marginalized, like Alex said, like neighborhoods, like around here, for example, we have the worst asthma, like worst childhood asthma of anywhere in the country. And like you've got the shitty water. And, like, guess who lives in those neighborhoods? It's not middle-class white people. I taught at public schools in South Providence and Mount Pleasant, and we had to have special meetings and, like, trainings on how to save the lives of our students with asthma, which was, like, all of them. Jeez. Because the air quality is so bad. It's putting people in danger. Like, we're putting children in danger. I don't know what else we can even say about that. And yeah, think about Flint. How long have they been without water? That should have been fixed, or it actually should have never been a thing in the first place. But these are the same groups that are contracting COVID at higher rates, being denied care at higher rates, and dying at higher rates. Racism isn't just about actively killing people out of hate, but also letting them die out of greed and neglect. It's gross. But I want to circle back to my original thought, which is that, like Alex said, climate justice is inseparable from racial justice, inseparable from class issues, housing, you know. And we can't just recycle when we remember and cut the plastic thingies that hold our six packs. We gotta put pressure on the fancy rich folks and hold corporations accountable. I know it's a word we hear a lot right now, but it's really important. Enter the climate justice plan, which is put forth by our city. You can read the whole thing. I think bullet points are just that it starts with Elorza talking about like science and facts, that kind of liberal crap. We gotta act now, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then there's Leah Bamberger, or Berger, I don't know, the city's director of sustainability, laying it out more explicitly. She says, we have an obligation to address the racial injustices of the climate crisis. Just like the pandemic, climate change will impact us all in ways that we can hardly imagine, but it won't impact us all equally. Low-income communities of color have contributed the least to this problem and have certainly profited the least, yet they're suffering the most. A couple of the like main things that the plan talks about. They propose the Building Energy Reporting Ordinance, BERO, which requires that large buildings in the city report their annual energy use to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So at least that will be recorded. And we can be like, it was you. You did that thing and it was out of control. Don't do that again. So that is going to be introduced at the city council meeting Thursday the 21st. Which I'm sure you can watch online. There's a separate ordinance that will establish the Office of Sustainability, as well as change the already existing Environmental Sustainability Task Force to rename it the Sustainability Commission and add 4 new seats, including 2 seats to youth. The rest is mostly like streamliney type stuff, but they do talk about a plan for residential composting, which is very cool. Taking on the issue of food waste is going to open up a whole another can of worms. So it's cool that there's this plan with their like task forces and teams and their racial and environmental justice committee. They get the youth on deck. They're usually they're speaking to citizens and like getting input, like, how do you do this? What works?
That's fantastic. That's great.
That's how it's supposed to be done. So it should be done. And it seems like something really positive. It's hard for me to have much faith in like anything, but when there are so many Elon Musks, it's good to know that like the Will Smiths of society are ready to protect Earth. And I don't have an analogy for the Jeff Goldblum character, but I want to acknowledge that he's very handsome. Sorry if that makes me basic. You can access the CJP, the Climate Justice Plan, at providenceri.gov. I've said this before, I don't really read, but for something this important, I skimmed it. It clocks in at 88 pages, so it's pretty dense, and there are lots of buzzwords, but I found it to be an inspiring read. The language is woke and exciting. They talk a lot about community and like uplifting people and fighting the good fight. I'll give you a little taste. It's each paragraph, each word was uttered with the fervent belief that we the people, we the frontline communities, we the organized labor, we the indigenous tribes, we the environmental justice advocates, we the youth groups, we the racial justice organizations will fight, take back our city and win. Boom.
I'm into it.
They check all the boxes. I think that there must have been some youths involved in writing that. The youths know how to send a good message. It is thorough, and if you're like me and are more of a visual learner, there are a lot of graphics, charts, and stuff that are easier to process than just statistics on their own. On the Uprise site, you can also watch a video of the conference between the mayor, a couple of city council members, and the community partners going over it. I'm going to be honest and say I did not watch this, but I'm sure there are some gems in there. I'm going to stop and drink water now.
This was very unexpected for me to see this headline come in. I was very happy to see it. I did not see it coming. Props to all of, like you said, all those younger groups, Generation Z and the different environmental organizations.
Well, because it's going to affect them the most.
Props to them for, punching back and, getting out there.
And like Greta gets all the attention because she's this like palatably cute white girl, but there are so many other groups doing the same work.
I'm impressed.
Aren't getting the recognition.
Yeah. She's from Scandinavia too,
right.
Which is also being extremely affected by climate change with the melting of the polar ice caps.
That's true.
I had two responses to that. The first one...
Don't argue with me about Jeff Goldblum. You know he's hot.
Damn it, I'm going to strike that off.
Yeah, I knew it.
As an objective fact.
The first thing, these aren't like criticisms or anything, just kind of larger points to make. One based on a story. When I lived in Chicago, I vividly remember that, we were the only white house on my entire street all the way to the University of Chicago. So most people at the University of Chicago lived in Hyde Park. I lived in Woodlawn because I couldn't afford Hyde Park. So I was the only white person there. And I remember I was the only person that was going out and recycling. I would like look over at my neighbors' recycling barrels and there'd be nothing in there. And the person I was with at the time complained a lot about these people that don't recycle, right? That there's something wrong with these people that won't recycle. Why won't they recycle? Because she was big into recycling. And I remember just thinking that, like, how many education programs do you think there are in the south side of Chicago, which receives very little investment, even in education, for teaching people what to recycle, how to recycle, what recycling is. And I said, because the city of Chicago doesn't invest pretty much anything in the South Side, and because the South Side is self-sufficient, if that education isn't there, then there's no way to improve it. And so this is by way of tying in to further complicating climate change, that not only is it a racial thing, but education is also a huge part of this. That, like, you can't just say, all right, everybody needs to start recycling, because not only, like, when you're talking about everybody, is the income extremely uneven across the board, but education is extremely uneven across the board as well.
Yeah, I'll raise your personal story, or I'll see your personal story and raise you a personal story, which, because, I'm from Louisiana, and in Baton Rouge, where, like, my folks live, and in New Orleans, where my friends are at, and other family members, there's not recycling. Like,
Yeah.
that people burn their trash, or just it all goes in the same thing. You can try, like, you can put in the time and the effort to sort stuff, but at the higher level, it's not happening. And look at who is living down there and who this is affecting, and same deal. Yeah, they're not being taught.
Isn't Louisiana the least educated state?
I don't like that terminology.
I mean,
but
like
they
I don't
have
know how they measure it.
They have a pretty sucky system.
I think that's all part of it.
I mean, I turned out incredibly intelligent, obviously.
It's because you moved out as quick as you could.
Listen.
Welcome to the East Coast.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of communities that definitely suffered, like, unfair amounts of levels of education comparatively to others, with, like, different kinds of, like, racial and other kinds of situations. That definitely has an impact, but I think it's also important to say that it doesn't matter how much we sitting at this table recycle, it's not going to solve all of the big issues, with everything either.
But we do, though. We do recycle.
We do recycle, yeah. And I know you guys definitely recycle.
We super do. We also compost.
Yeah, but I think a lot of the problems here are being addressed by that article that you have and the paper that you wrote, by the people that are contributing so much more than we are to what's happening in the environment. Mm-hmm. And I think that even, it's just like, what is that, BP Oil? They had that entire campaign that was on personal accountability to making the environment better.
Nice try, BP.
And that was after, like, they dumped, like, how many millions of gallons of oil into water.
I think that, like, yeah, that's a good example, because I think that climate change, or green politics in general, the Green New Deal, there's like two possible routes that this could take. We could end up with green capitalism, like sort of a reification of what already exists, but just with solar energy and all that shit. Or we could use this as an opportunity to reevaluate the economic base that we live under and the way that our society is structured. I hope that it's that last one and not the green capitalism, because then I'm pretty sure we're doomed.
I saw one article about this saying that the goal is to make changes at 2050. Is that too late?
2050, I know Elorza said we were Providence was going to be completely carbon neutral by then. I think that's the date that, like, scientists have said, like, once we pass 2050, if things haven't drastically changed, we are totally fucked. Well. So, like, yes and no.
At least Rhode Island will be not fully responsible, possibly.
Louisiana will just straight up be gone.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find right now where we stand in terms of parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. You can find it online. They usually update it every year, but for some reason I can't do it right now. The other thing I want to say is that you can perfectly well read Armageddon as a analogy of climate change.
Ooh.
There was this phenomenon that when scientists started, I mean, nuclear technology around Chernobyl, for example, 1986 to 1990. Those are the best horror movies that came out. Not just about like Toxic Avenger and like mutants coming out of toxically polluted places, but like all types of horror movies, because people were afraid of nuclear technology. It like really elicited fears. And Aliens sort of grew out of that as like, all right, we sort of have this nuclear thing taken care of, but now aliens. What happens if aliens come and fuck up our Earth?
So just Armageddon or all of...
Was Armageddon the one where I had the sex scene to that, like, I don't want to close my eyes?
I think
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah.
But then there was also,
yeah.
like, Deep Impact, which
Deep
could have
Impact.
been a sex
Thing. Could be a sex movie with that name, yeah.
but wasn't. But that was my favorite, like, end of the world movie, T. Leone. So hot.
That's the worst Aerosmith song ever.
It's not good.
I'm trying to find the... So we're actually at 417.1 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere right now.
So what does that mean?
It means that Earth is heating pretty rapidly.
Yep.
The Kyoto Protocol was something like, when we reach 350, then we're going to take drastic action, and that was in, I forget, 2011 or something like that.
So how many are we now?
417.
Oh, okay.
So we've well surpassed when
That's
we
good.
said we would crack down.
Mm-hmm. What else? I'm thinking about other movies now. Wall-E. Love that one.
Never seen it.
All right.
What about Space Cowboys?
We're gonna watch
Space Jam.
Space Jam. Great climate change documentary. Oh man, I had another one in mind. I mean, anything about Katrina.
What about those, what was that movie where they hid inside like this building
The Day After Tomorrow?
Yes, that is it. Yeah, that's another one.
All right. So yeah, we're over an hour. Thanks for listening to the PLR podcast. As always, you can find us on Instagram at PLR Pod. We're also dropping that Patreon pretty soon. And today's music is by Trevor Vaughn. It's hang on a second. I forget the name of it, but it'll be up. But it's a Trevor Vaughn song, so hopefully you're all familiar with Trevor.
And if not, you will be.
If not, you will be. And you can find all his stuff at MA Glory on Bandcamp.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.